Welcome, everybody, to Flambeau Noir 2021 in cyberspace. So, today we have Sorsha Runarius with us today. And Sorsha is a black magician and an eclectic witch, and likes to try and bridge the gap between magic and science, and tries to work with the underlying themes and mechanics of magic and things that could work across any tradition, essentially the basic mechanics of underlying how it all works. And she works with a lot of different traditions, including ceremonial magic, Enochian, death currents, Lovecraftian energies, working with the Abyss, which we're going to talk about today, sonic sigils, matrix magic, evocation, baneful sorcery, and all sorts of things. So Sorsha also launched Abyss Press in 2019 and works with a team of magicians and artists. So without further ado, Sorsha.
Well, thank you so much, Jeremy. It's a pleasure and an honor to be here. Thank you so much for putting this conference together this year.
Thank you for
Um,
participating in it. We really appreciate that you would give us a talk today.
well, thank you. It's a topic that is very near and dear to my heart. Echoes from the void, the magic of the abyss. I have a book for free of the same name that people can check out. So it kind of represents like a time in my life where it's like kind of a magical coming of age. You know, I see the abyss as a place of primordial creation and destruction. It's a place where you can really alter your reality. Um, I feel like, there's a lot of different ways of viewing the abyss. The abyss is both a personal and collective place because, people talk about, their own abyss journeys, their own abyss um, moments, whether it's some people might describe it as, dark night of the soul. I find that a lot of times we go into this void space, this abyss space when we are facing challenges in life. And, for me, it took like a catalyst, which took the form of a situation with a person a few years ago that kind of helped me to discover some things about myself, some things about, the nature of the universe. And in the following years after this thing occurred, you know, it's been a process of like reverse engineering the technology, which has set me on a lot of different, little rabbit holes to go down and explore into Wonderland. And it's been a really interesting process. And, you know, there's a lot of concepts and, personal gnosis that, is applicable, to my life. But there's a lot of things that I think can help other magicians and practitioners as well. Um, when we look at, magic in general, being able to alter reality through maybe, what we consider supernatural means or non-physical means. There's a lot of different definitions of magic. Um, I find that we can empower ourselves by, looking at the abyss as a place where we create the templates of reality. You know, I had there's different ways that one can access the abyss. There's meditation techniques. There are, you know, trance work, binaural beats. There's a lot of different ways that one can kind of entrain the brain, to get into these um modes that are conducive to doing magic. For me, the first time was in a float tank, a sensory isolation tank, being able to get rid of all of the distractions of the physical world, go within and then see what's there. Um, I find that there is a collective nature to the abyss because a lot of times people report seeing and experiencing similar things. There might be, certain entities that are described um, across different groups or people that tend to go on spiritual journeys of this nature. I find that the type of mentality and the type of energy you bring into the abyss um, will absolutely set the stage for your success in magic and the potential outcomes. If you go in with self doubt, then that is what resonates because it is. It is a I kind of think of it sometimes as like a resonant chamber. We are both the tuning fork and the instrument. Much like I consider, working with spirits, when we align ourselves with spirits, whether they are demons, angels, jinn, whatever type of spirit we're interested in working with, they kind of tune us, and then in turn we come into alignment with that. Their resonance wakes up the corresponding resonance within us, and then we in tune set that vibration and that frequency into the world, paired with our emotion, paired with our heart, paired with our true will. And then we can completely, do things that can supersede physical reality. And, I wrote a little bit about that previously in my book. And when you look at, you know, the abyss itself as a place of resonance, sometimes I find it helpful to think of, like a metaphor of, a spider in a spider web. How if a fly or a bug gets caught in the web, the spider knows where to go because of the vibrations felt. You know, in turn, when we are trying to create change, so whether we are, focusing on a person or a situation, um, we have to be able to feel it with every fiber of our being. And if we carry that with us when we are in this abyss space, getting there however one decides to. I mean, it can be ritualized or it can be just, sitting quietly, kind of descending within. But when you feel that, you know, that outcome, when you feel that reality, and some people might, argue that, okay, it's just, law of attraction. I mean, that does kind of play in, but it's not exactly like law of attraction because a lot of people, I think on the left-hand path, might kind of thumb their nose at it, saying, that's too light and fluffy, which, maybe not. I think that there's a lot of truth to being able to resonate with an outcome as if it has already been occurring in the present time and then physical reality shifting. The question is, okay, well, how does that work? I mean, we know like what it is, but why does it work? And I found that in the process of exploring these ideas, these concepts, I've come across some interesting work by a lot of different, sources, both magical and scientific. And I know that we were chatting a little bit earlier about, I'll definitely get some links to some websites so people can check it out for themselves and then explore it for themselves and go from there. But so when it comes to dealing with the fabric of reality, like this underlying matrix of magic and reality, I like to look at the things that supersede and the common thread that weaves between each of these different systems. Um, and this got me looking at what are the common themes in these systems, and also what is, some of the common themes, what's going on in the community. I find a lot of spirits have been talking about the human genome and DNA. Okay. And this is just, this has been an interest of mine. And it ties into the abyss because the abyss being a place of, creation, DNA then is also the building blocks of, the life of an organism. You look at DNA as having, made up of, you know, particles and molecules, and you have like base pairs that pair up. And DNA has a language. And this language, it has its own grammar. So when you look at DNA, the way that these pairs are expressed, in whatever order that they follow. I mean, you have, you know, like it creates a language. And so depending on how they are arranged will determine what the physical expression is that it's coding for. This could be important when it comes to looking at both physical and spiritual evolution, which I think is the work of a lot of magicians. It's about spiritual and physical evolution and ascent. At least that's how I approach magic. So when you look at, the patterns of DNA expressing, people have talked a lot about junk DNA, you know, but from a scientific perspective, junk DNA doesn't make sense because things are not selected for evolution that are junk, okay? It's more like dormant DNA. So when we activate this DNA by working, you could work with spirits, you know, but it's the more important point has to do with resonance, has to do with intent. And if we could get scientists and magicians to talk more across the aisle, it wouldn't have to be viewed through the lens of two completely different and clashing paradigms. You know, the gap between magic and science is shortening. You know, you can see where it interweaves. And I have found some really interesting work by Dr. I'm probably going to slaughter his name. It's in Russian, but Garyeva, I believe, is how to pronounce it. Dr. Peter Garyeva, and his work basically like founded the linguistic wave genetics. You know, there's an institute. And he recently died. He died this last year, unfortunately. But his work is definitely being continued by his colleagues. There was a team of like Russian and German scientists that got together and they did some really interesting experiments with studying the waveforms of DNA and the light that it emits when put through a spectrometer, which measures, the like biophotons. You have DNA, you have a sample of DNA, you irradiate it, with a laser. You look at it through the spectrometer, and you can see the waveform of the DNA. Now, if you remove the DNA, you can still see the waveform, and that's where they kind of came up with this idea of phantom DNA. Now, why this is all relevant to the abyss, because there's several different thought bubbles in my head at the moment. There's the abyss, there's DNA, there's all these things, tie it together. Well, what do magicians do? We change reality, whether it is a process of spiritual alchemy or physical alchemy. These scientists are doing the same thing that magicians are doing. They're just doing it through the lens of science, and I think if magicians can be, it would behoove us to be very interdisciplinary in our approach, very Renaissance in our approach. We should study, music, study math, study science, and vice versa. When you take the DNA, they discovered, like they looked at the language of the genome of the DNA, how it expresses, how you can, of course, through, physical means, you can edit DNA. You have the CRISPR program, you have ways to edit DNA, you have stem cell therapies, you have these different areas of science that play with the genome. That's been a hot topic for years. And there's been a ton of developments in the last decade with that. That being said, as magicians, if we want to be able to take our own evolution into our own hands, we can definitely be on the trajectory of doing so, because the scientists have discovered that you can alter DNA using sound, using light, using frequency, and most importantly, simply using language, human voice. This DNA responds to frequency, like a voice. They found a very intimate connection between human languages and DNA. Um, they found that in a laboratory setting, they would, they would have, the sample of DNA, you'd see the spectral analysis of the DNA. Well, then they took the DNA away, they would move it across the building and they would do the same thing, the same type of results. They could still see the after image, the phantom DNA. This phantom DNA stuck around for 40 days before it finally vanished. They took it, I think it was 20 kilometers away. So this is kind of, the whole spooky action at a distance, the quantum entanglement. What was really interesting was that they were able to manipulate both the physical and the spiritual DNA using, of course, they tinkered with lasers, they tinkered with, those types of more science, tools and techniques and experiments, but they also had these researchers speaking things over the DNA to change it. And they saw physical changes in the physical DNA sample, even when researchers miles away were focusing on it with intent. Well, that sounds an awful lot like magic. But what is magic? I see magic as being, maybe things that science hasn't quite latched onto, but science is latching onto it. And so we can look at magic through a more like a higher scientific lens. And then I think, embrace both worlds in a way that can benefit ourselves and each other. Um, we have, let's see, think of it as a way of like, it's like hyper communication. So when we, go into the abyss, when we create these realities, we can think of the patterns. The patterns are like DNA. So they found, in some of these experiments, with rats, they would have, pancreas cells. They would, inject it deliberately to like cause like a state of type 1 diabetes in these rat cells. Okay. So they would they would do that. These rats are dying, they're sick. Okay, well, then they would measure the frequencies of the cells, of the pancreas cells in healthy rats. Okay. And, they were able to, because light also has sound, sound and light are very interrelated. Um, they were able to analyze, based on like the light frequencies, they translated that directly to sound. Okay. So then they take the waveform and the sound of healthy cells, and they were able to transmit that via a laser to the sick cells. And in all of the cases of these rats, I think there were like 27 or 30 of these rats, the pancreas completely regenerated. Like it regenerated the organ, and this was done in a scientific laboratory setting. So I think that has tremendous potential. And I feel like it also kind of explains in some ways, why genetics are such a hot subject. People are very concerned about genetic things, especially, in our society with a lot of different things that might be going on. There's a lot of talk about, you know, modifying genetic excuse me, modifying genetic things, you know. And usually this technology is usually in the hands of scientists, governments, things like that. You know, the implications are pretty mind-boggling, but I feel like it is up to each person to be able to start considering their own evolution and what that looks like. I mean, if we can start exploring these technologies for ourselves. Now, granted, some of this research, there's a lot of proprietary things. I would love to get my hands on some of these, tools to tinker with, you know. But as a magician, I have to use other means. But as magicians, we can use these concepts and explore them further to figure out, okay, well, I don't necessarily have all of the same things available that I would in a lab. But as a magician, the abyss can be our lab. The abyss is a place where, you take these templates, whether it's, thinking about DNA or whether it's thinking about a person or a situation, a life circumstance, you create a template. It's like the technology is exactly the same. Maybe we're not playing with high-tech fancy lasers and equipment, but our mind is that laser. It's that intent. Because even when they took away the tools, the lasers, all of the fancy toys, when these scientists were even focusing on whether it was a pancreas cell in a rat or whether it was, plants and getting them to grow again after they have stopped growing or have been damaged and repairing them on a cellular level using non-physical means, using language. And what was really interesting was that the language didn't matter. They did a test group where they had people speaking in French, people speaking in German, people speaking in Russian. And, they were given a phrase to use. And it's obviously going to sound very different in different languages. But what was important was they held that intent, emotionally. You know, they they did this and they created physical, measurable changes using nothing more than their will, their intent, their voice. I mean, that's amazing. I think that's really inspiring and encouraging. So, you know, that is, scientists, that is, that realm in a more interesting mundane way. But as magicians, I think that we can take it to the next level. I think that we have more of an open mind when it comes to, I think, what is possible. Science still has their little boxes and categories they like to classify things by, you know. And for me, I got some pretty amazing results, kind of thinking about these concepts and using them in my own life. Now, this, my own experiences happened way before I did any, of this genetic type of research. This just kind of came out of it. Like one thing led to a natural other in the course of my explorations, but, to kind of encapsulate it, it involves, traveling into the abyss, feeling the resonance, seeing a situation that I wanted to change. And for me, it was like a life or death thing with a loved one. It was finding their resonance, and I happened to find it in the abyss. That's where I went, I went to the abyss, seeing them as they were. And that correlates exactly in my mind to, okay, that sick lab rat. Okay, she was like a sick lab rat. She was broken. She was dying. She wasn't doing well. She wasn't thriving. You know, the thing that made her her had left her body. Her body was on life support type of situation. And, and then being able to have the template, which is like the key to your DNA, that master template. It kind of corresponds there. Having that template act as a master pattern or a thought form, and then superseding that over the cells, over the situation, over the person. So you can use this universally, as an example, and then resonating, and that's where, okay, people think, okay, law of attraction. So it's like these multi little pieces of different technologies kind of blending together, and then my results were stunning. I got great results, doing this, being able to focus really intently, entertaining no room for doubt. It was just completely resonating in the moment for what I wanted, in the abyss, and then getting some pretty brilliant results. And, I was really heartened to see that, okay, I mean, I don't have to have any kind of external validation, but hey, my own results were my validation. It was pretty amazing for me. It was like life changing. It shifted how I viewed magic. It fundamentally changed me as a magician. And, and then in the course of, the spiritual exploration in the years following that, it led me to looking more at the quantum science, behind it. And I was just blown away by these studies and by these things that I've discovered, you know, um, you can think of like, both, the abyss and both our biology. It's like, quantum supercomputers. You have entanglement both on a physical molecular level as well as a spiritual level. There is so much, ways that this interweaves. I think that it's interesting that, you can transfer information, non-physically, seemingly non-physically, from one organism to another. So having, okay, sick organism, you can take the template from a healthy organism and then superimpose it, whether it's via a laser or whether it's via, your expression, your emotion, your voice. Well, what do a lot of magicians do? People may evoke, people may, we get into these rituals, we do these things, and sometimes we follow the steps, you know. But what's really important is the resonance, is the vibration, is the feel. And that's why I think, things like, okay, glossolalia, speaking in tongues, usually you hear about that more being a church thing, you know, but because of like the language aspect of DNA, the language doesn't really matter. It's the it's the energy behind the words. It's the intent. Just like, in that study, when you have different native speakers speaking this intention, they got the same results. The exact words aren't so important. So I think a lot of magicians, they might get caught up on, well, am I saying it right? Am I doing it right? Well, maybe look a little bit deeper than the surface worries. I mean, get into the heart of it, because when you're getting into things like glossolalia, it bypasses conscious understanding, goes right to the subconscious level, and then it sends a message, much like information is transmitted from, you know, gene to gene on a cellular level. Um, Being able to do that, with that resonance using voice, because voice and soul, it's so very interconnected. And it's something that, we all have. It's important to be able to, to speak up, to express ourselves, to be able to use our magical voice, and to be able to, excuse me, create change using that tool, because, we don't need fancy things. We don't need all the accoutrements of, magic to, whatever that means. Different systems have different, you know, different requirements, but the only requirement that you have to really do this work is, be human and be able to feel things really deeply. I mean, that's universal, that's primal, that's basic. When you are sharing a human experience, then it transcends culture, it transcends, magical tradition, and it gets to the underlying heart of how things work and why they work, and it opens up a lot of doors and potentials. Um, Pardon me while I peek at some of my notes. Mm, yeah, yeah, that would be great.
Yeah. So what? Just for people who are brand new to all of that stuff, what is the abyss? Like, how do you define that, and maybe like how do you approach the abyss as well?
Okay, that's a really good question. I know I kind of went off on a more like genetic tangent, but with the abyss, I see that as like, partly it's like the still small place, within, but it's like this. I mean, some people might see it, on the tree, as kind of like this place between the worlds. I don't necessarily, I don't know, I just kind of experience it as a place of creation and destruction. I mean, when I went there, I'm looking, hey, what am I seeing around me? I experienced it as more of kind of like a dark place. Yes, there are things within it that I saw. I saw, black flames and violet flames. I saw people, you know, when I could, kind of perceive people in the world. I was kind of, seeing them kind of manifest, like their thoughts, their emotions kind of came up as like black flames and violet flames that, you know, represented like their spiritual energy, their drive, their will. And, I saw things like that in the abyss. But, the abyss being a place where it represents in some ways like your spiritual birthright. It's a place of unlimited power and potential. And we can find ourselves there because that's what we are. We as human beings have spiritually unlimited power and potential. And we have certain limitations, obviously, living in a physical world. Like, we're not going to go jump off, the Empire State Building and think we're going to fly. I mean, we there's laws of physics, okay, because of a collective reality that we experience. So, I mean, use some common sense. But when it comes to, spiritual things, I really believe that we're limitlessness. And the abyss to me is limitlessness. So it really represents like working within your own sense of limitlessness, giving yourself permission to remove the human shackles. Okay. And sometimes we do that by maybe we ritualize it, we, we can calm ourselves. We can see ourselves, journeying to this, place. Some people might see it as kind of like an underworld place, the subconscious place, but it's a place of potential because it can represent like both to me all and nothing. You know, I I went in there when I was, in the sensory deprivation tank. I had a moment of panic because I'm like, am I dead? I couldn't feel my body. And even though I knew that I was sitting there floating in a tank of, salt water and it was dark, my body disappeared. Okay. So when our body disappears, where does our consciousness go? So for me, it was like I had this moment of panic, even though I knew I had a body. I had no sensory input whatsoever, and I stayed in for a few hours, just completely tripping on
Wow.
my own.
Nice.
Mind. It was intense. It was one of the most intense
I've
abyss
always
experience.
wanted to try a flotation tank, but I've never had the opportunity.
Oh, do it. Absolutely do it. Some of the newer ones, they have LED lights and they have music you can pipe in. But if you want like a really intense abyss experience,
Hmm.
you go in there completely, you know, naked as the day you were born.
Yep.
Go in there with no lights, no sound, and, entomb yourself in water and understand, yeah, you're in a dark enclosed space. Some people may not do well with that, but if you can get past the whole I'm stuck in a coffin underground feeling,
Right.
that's going to go through your head most likely. After the initial human little moment of panic and then the whole tilt a whirl, okay, I have no sense of balance or direction. I'm swirling through space. It's like you're a rocket through space, and what I saw was like really complex geometric shapes. After the initial panic wore off, it was like then I was everywhere, and then it's like, well, body, what body? Who cares about a body? I'm pure energy, pure consciousness. So I had this sense of being pure consciousness,
Oh wow.
and I think I believe that the abyss can be experienced very collectively because I was part of a research group at Western Oregon University where it was in a cultural anthropology class, and we could do different projects, and there were 8 of us that did experiments with mutation tanks, and so for that the entire term we weren't allowed to talk to each other. Those of us that were in this particular study, and so we all had to go float, at different times and do different things. And then at the end of the term, we had to report back. So all of us were isolated from each other. We couldn't have any communication about our findings. And at the end of the term, we all experienced very, very similar things. All of us saw like complex geometric shapes. All of us reverted back, like we saw ourselves, like a sense of reverting back through time. For me, it was very surreal. It was like breathing through my skin. I mean, this was like some seriously primal type of sensations that our bodies, the lizard brain, the primal brain remembers. And so the abyss process, for me, I got there in a float tank the first time. The second time was, that experience that kind of catalyzed me that I wrote about in my book. That was definitely of a more personal nature. Um, being able to look at the common themes. I think that there is some truth to that. That like what's going on if you have a lot of different people having very similar things without any way of verifying it until after the experiment was done. You know, that that raises a lot of interesting questions, I think, for people who look at that and who've maybe experienced that. The abyss being that still point, that place, being able to feel something. Um, like okay, a more like a practical approach would be like, okay, in my case, it was trying to save a friend's life. For me, to make it personal, it was okay, what does this person feel like to me? What does the resonance feel like? My best friend, somebody that's like a sister. Okay. I was not willing to, like, it was unimaginable. Losing her was the thought was absolutely like, I couldn't wrap my head around it.
Hmm.
You know, I mean, yes, people die. I mean, I get it. People die. But not in my fucking reality, you know? I mean, with this
Right.
particular person, this was like a no, this is not her time. The whole situation shouldn't have happened. It was due to a medical error that sent her into this coma. And being able to look at that, but feel that. And that's where, you look at like this networked intelligence, being able to find the resonance of a person or find the resonance of a situation that you want to change in your life. Okay, what does it feel like to be, you know, getting that job, to be, you know, cursing that person or, healing this person. I mean, so you can use it for any type of magical intent, but you have to feel that so intensely. And when you do that, when you specifically do that in this abyss type of state, you know, you can do some pretty like miraculous things, seemingly miraculous things. But to me, okay, what is a miracle? People talk about, raising the dead and changing waters to wine. I mean, there's, some people that's their standard of miracles. But, to me, that's like, okay, quantum entanglement, being able to create change while in this state, while resonating at these masters, I call them master templates. So whether it is a person or a situation, and then it comes into phase. So you have your current situation, you have your template, you have to bring them into phase.
Okay.
Okay. And you do that through resonance. Now, as magicians, that's kind of how I see us as doing it. As scientists, of course, they were doing it with lasers, but also paired with intent. And there's a lot of different examples that I can go into, but it's like the same technology through two different disciplines, if that makes sense. Does it make sense?
Yeah, I think so. Um, so we have some other questions that have popped up here. Uh,
Okay.
A2 Malku asks, "Hi Sorsha, do you have something to say about the abyss in its relation to Leviathan and our unconscious mind?"
Yeah, I would say so because when I was, in my little spiritual travels into the abyss, you know, or when I'm doing magic in the abyss, oftentimes I kind of perceive something that felt like a Leviathan type of creature, like coming up from the depths. I've kind of seen the abyss as both like a cavernous place, but also as like a great black ocean that one is swimming through. And I sense things around me that, you know, one of them might be perceived as like a Leviathan type of energy coming up, and the subconsciousness. I find that the thing, and that's when I say, you got to be careful what you bring into the abyss because that's what tends to be magnified, vibrationally there. So this is a place that we can address our subconscious things. You dive into yourself, like, okay, going into a float tank, I had nothing but time and darkness on my hands. And then, all the sensory, all the worldly stuff, like completely ceases to matter. It is not there. It simply does not exist. You don't think about anything but what literally lies within. And then it just, you might have like, visions and dreams and all kinds of waking things as you're doing an experience like that. But subconsciously, a lot of things might manifest in the abyss, subconsciously. And it might take the form of, sometimes it takes the form of external creatures. Um, but I find like working with, one can work with the different energies of the abyss and the different creatures that reside within the abyss, I think, to unlock the potentials both within our subconscious and within our DNA.
That's pretty powerful. So, something that I had a question about
Okay.
in relation to the abyss. What you describe as an experience of the abyss sounds very similar to an experience that is taught in some of the like Tibetan traditions, some of the advanced Tibetan sleep yoga traditions.
Oh, okay.
So you have like lucid dreaming, right? Where you are consciously aware during a dream. But then there's another thing that is similar where during deep dreamless sleep, where there's no experience generator that's being active right now, you're just essentially pure consciousness, I guess, uh, that you can be conscious. That usually people will just, because they don't have that experience as a crutch to hang their consciousness on. Like you identify with your body a lot of the time unconsciously, right? When you walk around and you identify with all kinds of things, right? And if you identify with the clothes you wear, you identify with the surroundings that you find yourself in, right? And when that whole thing is gone, um, then most people will just swoon and they'll just lose consciousness. But if you sometimes by accident you'll be conscious, or sometimes through training you can maintain your consciousness in that state. And I have a friend who told me about an experience once where he found himself in what sounds like that state, and it was so uncomfortable to him that he just started like manifesting things to in order to basically create a dream, because he was like having a conscious non-experienced state, essentially you could call it,
Yeah.
and he couldn't handle it.
It definitely creates this, this cognitive dissonance that really does happen. And I absolutely experienced that, when you have like no, whether you're okay, for me, it happened really strongly in a float tank, but just even when you start shedding layers of like the physical aspects of your humanity, your clothes, your relationships to other people, when that is no longer a factor, it's like, well, because that's how we define ourselves. People define themselves usually within the context of a society, a culture, a spiritual path. you know you're a
Right.
mom, you're a dad, you're a brother, you're a sister, you're a worker, whatever. We have like this self-awareness, self-definition based on all these external things. But when you remove that, what the hell are we? You know, that it's a mind fuck, pardon my language. It's a mind, it's dissonance. And it it's very disorienting. But if you can push through that, you know, then it strips away all that you are not to reveal that which you truly are, which is some sort of energy and consciousness. And in the more lucid state, it's like I had a moment of, okay, I'm blacking out of reality, this must be what death is like, and oh fuck, here I go, boom, I had to wake up, I'm gone. And then but then I was there again, my body wasn't there, I didn't feel my body, I had no concept of my body for a few hours at least.
Actually, and this
But the
brings up a
great thing
topic.
is
Okay, go ahead. Finish your thought. And
I
then...
was gonna say, they say that for every hour in the float tank, it's like 8 hours of solid, beautiful REM sleep, and I can attest that's absolutely. I felt like $1,000,000 walking out of that tank a few hours later, like the best rest ever. But I was completely awake, but I was no sensory input, but it was all in the third eye, in the mind's eye, and even though my eyes were open, you can't see your hand, you know. I mean, one can recreate that. I mean, you can. There are different like ways to like bring yourself into that state. So one can do it through like trance work, through brainwave entrainment, like binaural beats are a good way. I personally, I have a little, I call it the chamber of darkness. I have a little closet, I painted it black, but one could always hang up dark fabrics or just turn off the lights, go into like a little kind of a darker space. Try to have it muffled, no light, no sound. It's not quite the same as a float tank, obviously, because you still feel the weight of your body, but it kind of can bring in the essence of the abyss, of an abyss type of experience. You might feel yourself kind of sinking, falling, shedding layers. And then if all you have is pure consciousness, you have no limits, there's no expectations, other people's stuff, you know, you might have a feeling of, am I the only thing in existence? And then that could be like a terrifying thought. Well, I'm all alone. you know but then wait a minute, I'm also God, I'm my own, we're all this divine creature that can create things. Well, what do you want to create? What do you want to envision? And then your eyes might be open, and if you can't see, you're going to start having like projected, like what's in your mind's eye is going to be projected in front of you. You might have like waking visions physically in front of your eyes that that play out like a movie. If you're in total darkness and silence, it often happens like that. um, but you can work with that, and that's like the essence of what you are, the essence, like the codes of what you are. There's a lot of geometry, there's a lot of there was a lot of like golden mean type of, you know, shapes occurring that I saw in this state. And, you know, platonic solids, like 3D moving, really complex geometric shapes, you know. And when we look closer at like, you know, DNA on a smaller level, it does follow these geometric shapes, the way that they are arranged, you know, the helixes, the fractal nature of things, you know. Um, and a lot of magical traditions, you know, play with these different, you know, geometries and angles and things like that. But we kind of like see that when we were, you know, when we were in that state. A lot of things can kind of come to mind subconsciously, but then be brought to the consciousness, and then we can just explore them and put that energy, that frequency out there, and then it like anchors in the physical, and then it can supersede physical reality. And then in some ways I see it as like playing with dimensions, you know. Sometimes the things that you're seeing and experiencing in these states where you strip out one physical reality, then it's like, well, what choice does your consciousness have but to tap into to something else? Maybe you're tapping into other dimensions, maybe they're bleeding through, maybe as you seek that frequency, it seeks you, you know, you pull it towards you, and then it bleeds through into this reality, you know, and then anchors itself, and then creeps out into the physical. And then we have changes that are both, you know, might be like an alchemical process inside, you know, like, hey, we come out feeling changed, but you know, that's awesome. But when you can get physical, tangible results that other people can also measure, you know, we don't want to seek external validation, but it's kind of cool when it happens.
Right.
But that's the level that we're playing at as magicians when we really embrace our limitlessness. And we can do that through the abyss, in my opinion, and in my experience.
I agree. I think it's like pretty much the key to it all. You might as well say. Um, and I feel like if you can, you know, enter the abyss, essentially you could create universes. And
That's exactly.
when I was thinking there, and you said that when you're out there, you kind of feel lonely, and I was thinking, well, did God create the universe because he was lonely? You
You
know,
know, and that
using, you know, archaic language, but the concept
yeah.
there.
What's funny is like there was a moment of utter aloneness, and that's something that we all have to face. You know what? Like in some ways, you know, we all die alone, even if we're surrounded by loved ones. It's like it is a very personal thing, and some people, you know, the abyss is kind of like it's a place of death and life to me.
Mhm.
So it's like at one instance, I felt utterly alone, like there was nothing else in existence but me. But then it's like, but yet I also felt everything, you know. And when I ritualized it, you know, when I was fighting for a friend's life, and I did so magically, I when I ritualized this experience in the abyss, and when I, you know, put out the energy feelers, you know, the vibration, the frequency of, you know, the health, the healing, the soul surgery that had to be done, you know, I did a lot of energy work. You know, I tapped into like cosmic forces. You know, I did it on the eclipse type of thing. You know, I pulled the energy, I drew down the energy of the eclipse, of all these things happening, and then it's like, you know, something shifted in me, and I felt it's like I could feel everybody on the planet at once. Like I could feel like being everywhere, you know, even though I happened to be in Arizona at the time, you know, I could feel everything. So it was both a feeling. On one instance, I have an abyss experience where I was utterly alone and thought I was dead for a few hours, but then I didn't really care. It was like, but it doesn't matter. It's not painful. It's just, it simply is. It's just another shade of being. On one hand, there's that aspect, and then on the other hand, there's like complete connection to everybody, you know? So it's like it can be both lonely and the most healing thing as well. So there's both the disconnect and a connection depending on kind of the angle at which you view it,
There's
if
a
that makes
yeah,
sense.
absolutely. There's a term that I like that expresses that to me personally. It speaks to me in that way that you've described, and it's thanateros. You know the term? Basically, it's a compound word that combines thanatos and eros, basically death and
Huh.
sex. And
There we
so they're
go.
kind of like uh, the two sides of the same coin in a sense, right?
Yeah, that's absolutely that's a great word, and that's a good way to describe it because it is both, sex being the ultimate, creative, you know, act, for our species.
Mhm.
I mean, obviously life on the planet,
Right.
there's sexual division. I mean, not just obviously humans. I mean, but just it is very much two sides of the same coin. And I've had, when I, work with the abyss, I see, I go down. And it's like you have to become like a citizen of the abyss, you know. And what I mean by that is a lot of times when we go into these zones, and this also could be, going into the subconsciousness, going into the collective, going into this abyss space. Sometimes when we first go there, we feel like an interloper, like, okay, it feels kind of taboo. Should I be here? It's so different from physical reality. We wonder, should I even be here? Do I belong here? And the answer is yes, you can exist both places. I think that's good to have a foot in both worlds because then that energy is always available because it's limitlessness. As magicians, sometimes we might expend a lot of our own personal energy in ritual, but when you're tapping into the abyss, it's limitlessness. It's like grabbing a power line and not getting fried. You have access to this unlimited energy coursing through you, so you can draw on that energy and then use it to fuel any kind of, if you want to do a ritual, a spell, energy working, whatever. So you're not necessarily burning up all of your own energy. It becomes part of your energy. It becomes part of you, and you experience more levels of your own limitlessness when you tap into this space.
Like 0 point energy. Have you heard
Yeah,
that term
and
before? 0 point
yes,
energy.
I absolutely have. It's like a supernova. It's like you condense upon yourself, and like when a star goes supernova, it will. And this was kind of the visual that I got, doing some of this working was, I'm seeing myself, expanding, expanding. I happened to do it, I did some breathing exercises, it's like, okay, there's a sense of like expansion and contraction. And then it's like this coalescing, this coming together, pulling these forces together within you. It's like this little black sun in the middle of you, and then it explodes out. And when you explode it out, that's where your intent is, like the laser. That's where the laser comes in, the laser of the mind, being able to hone it at a target and then
Right.
bam. But encoding it with that, you know, that spiritual DNA waveform, which takes which can be expressed via light, via sound, via song, voice. That intention transmits from, one reality to another, one organism to another. And it's, magicians get results, scientists get results. It is the same underlying technology, just playing with different toys and filtering it maybe through different ends of a spectrum on a lens.
Well, yeah, looking at it through a different lens, essentially, right?
Absolutely.
So we're pretty much at our hour here, but there
Okay.
was one question that maybe if we take 5 minutes or less, but maybe you could address this one. A couple people in the chat were asking about the concept of crossing the abyss and encountering like a guardian of the abyss. And that whole esoteric concept of crossing the abyss, and how does that tie into what you've been talking about today? Or does it?
It does. It does. I think there's like some different schools of thoughts. I think,
Mhm.
some schools of thought say, well, you go to the abyss for different things, but you don't cross it until you're dead. You know, I don't know. I haven't found the limits. I haven't found the edge of the abyss. I'm still exploring. So I don't necessarily know that there's like, it's kind of like a place between places, and maybe you might pass through it in that regard. But for me, one of the guardians that I encountered, it manifested as like a god of death. Not really a particular god. It didn't have a name. It was just like the essence of death itself. And I had to face death, you know. And it was a very literal thing in the case of, what my friend was facing. And there was no way, or like the way that it manifested to me was like, okay, like kind of like a bridge, a pathway. And there were like endless drop offs on either side. So there was no way to go around death, you know? And I'm like, well, okay, but my friend is on the other side of death, you know, this this thing, the objective. Now, for me, it happened to be a friend that I was willing to go through anything to get to her.
Mhm.
Um, for the magician, the thing on the other side of that that obstacle maybe is your magical objective. You have to be willing to go right through death to be able to get there. Now, this doesn't necessarily mean that, okay, you physically have to die to get what you want and to do magic. No. To me, the death was like the illusion, because I walked right through death. I said, like, like, if you're not here to help me, then, get out of the way. Death wouldn't move. Death wouldn't move. I wouldn't move. I'm very stubborn. So is death. Death is very patient. And, for me, it was like a sense of, okay, I don't know what's going to happen to me, because I was so into the abyss, that I was very attached to it. I'm like, well, I don't know if I'm even going to come out of this. What if my body dies? Doesn't matter. I'm doing this anyway. It was just a feeling of, I'm so invested in this place. I am so committed to this working that literally no other thoughts were in my head but achieving this. So to me, it led me on a path of walking right through what could have been death.
Mhm.
But at the end of the day, I walked through it and it dissipated. And then, death kind of, smiled. And it's like I knew that I would see death again at some point in my life. I mean, we all do, but not today.
Right.
And that's, I think that we face that. We face this death essence in the abyss. And I think that it's helpful to embrace it and work through it. And then you'll be kind of amazed at what you might discover, and still being able, while still being in this life, traversing it and exploring it. But I've not found the edge of the abyss as of yet. Just continuing on my way.
Right. Like a bottomless pit, perhaps.
Exactly. Exactly.
Or an endless well.
An endless black sea of primordial, both chaos and organization. You
Mm.
bring the organization, you see those templates, you create those, they anchor, you create reality from the abyss.
Like the astral equivalent of the primordial ooze.
Yes.
Or beyond that even, maybe.
Yeah. Yeah, I think so. But it's been, I enjoy working from that angle, because it served me very well as a magician. It's changed me fundamentally as a magician. It's helped me to just expand, the things that I am exploring and embracing. And I think that if people are interested in the abyss, take your own abyss journeys. There's a lot of different ways, but just find what works for you, get into that point, but have that sense of limitlessness, have that, that no restrictions, no human limits, and then embrace that, feel that, resonate with that, let that be your master template. Maybe that's like your higher self, encountering your higher self as well, what that looks like. And then your physical life can line up to that, and then that higher self can then be better expressed in this lifetime.
Well, I think that's a great way to end this one. And
Okay.
a lot of people have been mentioning in the chat how much they've enjoyed the talk. Thank you once again for participating in this and sharing your knowledge with us of the Abyss and all of the other things that you shared with us today. It was very valuable, and I really appreciate you doing this for the community.
Well, thank you again. It's an honor and a pleasure. And, I want to thank everybody that came to the chat to be here as well.
Yeah,
And
everybody who came and participated in the chat, and people who just showed up to watch as well live.
people who watch it later, I
Yeah,
appreciate all of you
absolutely.
guys. Thank you so much. I love this community. I love being out here. And I think that it's really awesome, being able to be a part of this. Thank you so much, Jeremy.
No problem. My pleasure. Now, what we'll do is, if you send me the link to your book, the ebook, the downloadable one, I think
Okay.
you said, and anything else you want me to share with the audience of this video later, I'll put it in a comment and pin it to the top
Okay.
of this video so people have those
Perfect.
resources available to them if they want to check it out.
Okay. That sounds great. Thank you so much.
Okay, thanks again, and we'll talk soon.
Definitely.